helping you find the right tax professional and avoid the latest scams. This is Taxpayer Beware, presented by the California Tax Education Council.
Most tax preparers are honest professionals, but unfortunately, there's still those that trick taxpayers into believing they're trustworthy. What if this happens to you? Joining us for Season 5 of Taxpayer Beware is Tom Lesabin, enrolled agent, CTEC board member, and governmental relations expert with the National Association of Tax Professionals. Also joining us are Rebecca Landeros with the Franchise Tax Board Taxpayer Enforcement Team. Welcome, Tom and Rebecca.
Nice to be here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We're starting to get some emails and calls from taxpayers who have listened to our podcast and they're sharing situations they face. We recently received a call from one individual who faced multiple situations we hear often. The individual agreed to let us share his story. So what we'd like to do is go through each scenario this individual faced and have Tom and Rebecca provide insights. This individual's name is Paul. He works in construction. He has hired licensed tax preparers in the past, including enrolled agents like Tom. But in this case, he chose to go with someone that was referred to him and assumed that he could trust him. And here's the other tricky part. Paul lives in Nevada, but the firm he hired is located in California. The preparer claims he has a degree in accounting from a California State University, which may sound good enough, but having a degree does not meet California requirements for tax preparers. One of our CTEC representatives did try to verify the preparer and the firm he works for through the CTEC website, California Board of Accountancies, and also the IRS website. The preparer did not show up on any of those databases. Our CTEC representative also visited the firm's website, and we could not locate any mention of a tax preparer credential. So Rebecca, let's start with you. Again, this is a tax preparer based in California, but the preparer is preparing an out-of-state return. Are there any legalities with doing this?
So first off, we have been facing a lot more questions of this sort. Since COVID, as we know, it's become easier. So that's a good thing, right? It's easier for us to meet virtually. It's easier for us to do things that aren't in person. So we have had more preparers working with taxpayers out of the state, as well as taxpayers who are working with California preparers who are in California. So the first thing is to explain that anyone working in California as a tax preparer, regardless of where their client is, regardless if they're meeting them face-to-face or they're meeting with them virtually because they're out of state, if they are physically here in California, even if they don't live in California. We have preparers who live out of state, but they come to California to work each season. So they are now subject to the laws of California. And in California, the law is very clear that if you're preparing tax returns here in California, you have to have a credential. So you either have to have an active CPA, attorney, or enrolled agent license, or you have to register with CTEC. So if you don't have one of those licenses or a CTEC registration, then it's important to understand then you are now subject to enforcement. And that's where our enforcement office comes in. And if we're able to identify a preparer is in California preparing tax returns and they don't have a credential, then they are then subject to letters from our office, phone calls, site visits. We do go visit offices. And then penalties. And the penalties are, they're pretty tough. So the first penalty is $2,500, which has a 90-day grace period. We give them lots of time. We're here to work with everyone, right? So, we have people say, well, I wasn't aware of the law. So you have the 90-day grace period. But then after that, we have to believe, we've given you all of the information. Then the penalty is $5,000 every year after that. So it is very clear. We, want to make sure that taxpayers understand, as well as tax professionals. If you are in California, regardless of if this is your resident state, you have to follow the law. It's not always clear, people say, but I want to make it very clear. You are in California. whether it's for a week or 2 or a day. If you are here preparing tax returns, you are now subject to California law.
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. Anything to add, Tom?
That's the first thing I kind of noticed there was the scenario of the preparer giving away mentioning that he's exempt for some reason, but yet the warnings I think could be there. The IRS does that, say what you should look for in a preparer, and I think maybe that would go somewhere to explain to that, because taxpayers can unfortunately be gullible and they want to believe, especially from a referral source. And I look at all the years that I've been doing tax returns, and almost all of my clients have come from referral. So I take a little bit of time to explain a little bit about me, because they don't know me other than from their friend. So I think we could have that third party would be good too, to say, I don't want to call it a warning, but be advised.
Yes, that's true. And I like that you bring up the fact about referrals, because, you're right. Lots of people refer and they feel weird or uncomfortable asking the individual for their credentials. In California, CTEC, the registration is important, because if you're not registered with CTEC, then you do have to have one of the other 3 licenses. But it just takes a minute, right? To ask the person, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because unfortunately, not everyone is going to be as good as you, right? Or you're providing all that information, but others who may not be as honest and actually are planning to do, fraud on these individuals, they may not bring to the attention of the fact that they don't have a credential, or they don't want people to know anything about them. So I always say, regardless of if your mom referred this individual, and maybe you don't want to make your mom upset because, you questioned their friend. No, it's important that you take those few minutes. Those few minutes of confirming who that individual is going to possibly save you lots of time and money. Because if you don't question that individual and they do things that they shouldn't have done, and then it's going to possibly mean an audit, which then you have to pay money back, and hiring a whole nother person. So that means paying another person. So those few minutes to go to the website, you can go to the Board of Accountancy, the California State Bar, the IRS EA website, or to the California Tax Education Council to check on the registration or the licensing. You can also call them. There's lots of ways to confirm these individuals. So first they give you their credentials, and then you go and verify, because it's very possible that they do have a CPA license number, but that license is not active, or California State Bar or an enrolled agent license number. And you find out that they've been suspended, or it's inactive, or it's in a status other than active. You want to make sure it's active. If it's not an active status, then they should not be working as a tax professional.
Yeah, and then in the example, Paul, that we're talking about today, and we'll continue down some more scenarios, right? Didn't know those resources were available. It was someone that was referred to them. There was that kind of trust because of that, and come to find out or ran into any issues. In your experience, Rebecca, have you seen other scenarios where some of the individuals, whether it's committing fraud or maybe not accurate tax returns, where we run into issues where it's come from referrals or family members?
I have. And it's really sad because, friends have been lost. Business associates have been lost. I had a case this season, actually, where an individual had been going to this preparer for many years, like almost 10 years, and they'd never had an issue. But then suddenly, the preparer stopped contacting them. They didn't file the returns, even though they had said that they filed the returns. They found out from the IRS and FTB that the returns weren't filed. They had referred this individual to family members. And so now this individual was in a panic. Like, what happened to this person? Why did they suddenly become this way? And I referred all these friends and family to them, and now they're upset with me because of this. So again, it's important year for year, because maybe they were good 10 years ago, and now suddenly something in their life has changed, or something in their practice has changed, and So take the time each year, call them up, you're making an appointment. Hey, how are things? Credentials are still good. This is what I have for you. Double check it. Or if you wonder, maybe you do still trust them and you want to go to them, but their license or their registration is not active, and you can let them know, I'd like to make an appointment, but I noticed your license or your registration is not active. Are you still preparing tax returns? Will you be making that effort to put it in active status soon? Give me a call when it is. Just those few extra minutes. But yeah, it happens.
Yeah. So I think it's so great for the audience to know the resources are there for you to be able to research to see if the tax professional that you're thinking about changing to or referred to is someone that's registered or has the correct credentials. So thank you so much, you guys. All right. So let's talk about the second scenario. So Paul faced, his tax return was pretty standard, and the preparer charged him $2,100, which at the time he thought was pretty high, but he still paid it. Paul says his new tax preparation firm, that he had recently hired, said the fees were high, and that because of his tax situation, and he currently works with an EA and CPA at the firm in Nevada. He also confirmed his current tax preparation fees with the C-type representative that he talked to, and that the fees are much lower and seem more aligned with the standard return. So basically, the tax preparer that he's working with had alluded that he checked with C-Tech and that the fees were something that was standard, which seemed a little off to Paul at the time. And Paul said that his preparer in question required the payment up front. So, and then later requested additional fees after the return was even completed. And so, he required Paul to provide all the bank account information, his banking password, claiming it's standard practice to get an overview of his financials. And so even Paul thought that this was a little odd because the referral, he trusted the situation and gave all of the information. Tom, can you provide any insight, maybe on scenarios that you've seen or anything that Paul had shared there?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I mean, there's so many red flags that come up in this circumstance that it's shocking. I saw Rebecca shaking her head, and I was as well. And I'm thinking about, if a guy pulled up in front of your house and offered to do some landscaping and wanted all the money up front, we'd be hesitant about that, wouldn't we? But people do this all the time. And, I've had, clients, I've been around for a long time in the tax world, and typically I'll tell them, no, we'll settle up at the end, but, you want to give them a range of fees, how much you think it's going to cost. I actually applaud Paul for reaching out, and trying to get a range of fees. I know our organization that I work for, that you introduced me, NATP, we do an annual fee survey, and they can be really, really different depending on where you're located and the complexity of the returns. So it's difficult to say that this is a set fee. But the part about paying in advance before you've had any work done and providing all of this personal information without really knowing this person, again, I liken it again to walking out to a person who might be the most reputable landscaper in the world, but if he's standing there next to his truck and asking me all that information, I'd say, no, wait a minute. I'm not sure I want to give you all this. So I wanted to say with like the previous comment, we want to trust, but verify. We want to look at the better side of people, but this happens all the time. The person in the grocery store parking lot that says, oh my gosh, my wife is stuck inside and I need $10. Well, let me walk inside with you. I think trust but verify. I think that's the key. And people are taken all the time, and you think this is something that's limited to elderly people. Not at all. I mean, I had a younger client. I was out of town teaching, and luckily, when she went into the bank to withdraw some cash, the bank said, "You seem really upset. What's going on?" "Oh, I got told I'm going to be arrested if I don't pay this, and I have to take this cash, and I have to go and buy iTunes cards, to satisfy it." And this was not an elderly person. This was a smart young professional, and luckily, the bank teller said, "Maybe you want to call your tax person." So it's easy to be sucked into these types of situations, but these are red flags. These are red flags of the people that take money and disappear. I'm sorry, but the statistics are way skewed towards we got a bad situation developing here, especially with, now, he paid. Why does that preparer need to know more financial information? We're not applying for a mortgage. His legal financial obligation was just settled based on what the guy said he was going to need. Why would you need more information? So that to me would be a huge red flag.
Yeah, the bait and switch. Go ahead and pay now, and then I'm gonna hold me finishing this over your head unless you pay me more. Paul was right to kind of red flag that as a concern.
Yeah, exactly. My first thought with that story was, oh my goodness, go put a red flag on your credit report, because who has this person sold your social security number to? Right?
Dang.
You now don't know. They know your password. They know, your social security number. They have all the information they need to go pass it on to other individuals. It's really scary. But, we're kind-hearted people just by nature. And so we see someone that appears to be in need, and so we want to help, right? But again, like you said, you have to verify that. And so when you're buying a car, you shop around, right? And you verify that things are in the car that they say are in the car. Is it what you want? So it's kind of a tricky thing, because you want to shop around and you want to get a good deal. But then again, that next thought comes into mind of you get what you pay for. So you don't want to pay the person who says, oh, I can get you a great deal and I'm only going to charge you this little bit of money. But then another individual who is a reputable tax professional charges a lot more, but they are actually going to do what needs to be done. The other individual is just looking possibly to get personal information from you. So it's not how cheap it is or how expensive it is. It comes down to who's actually going to have the license or the CTEC registration, and who do you trust, and who can actually do the work. And so it's tricky. And so I think the key word is verification. Verify their work, verify who they are, and hopefully that will help. But there are other ways, as well, to try to avoid these things. And that is to, again, going back to listen to your gut. If something's telling you something isn't right, like, why are they asking me all these questions? It's okay to get up and walk away. I know we've talked about this in other podcasts, but I want to reemphasize that if you're sitting there and you feel like, oh man, I'm already here, I'm sitting here, I've already spent this time with them, I can't just get up and walk away. If there are red flags and your gut's telling you something isn't right, get up and walk away, because most likely there's something isn't right. So get yourself more time to verify. And then if everything works out, then you can go back to that individual. But in this case, yeah, that individual gave up a lot of information that wasn't necessary.
I mean, really good, really good advice, you guys. And, it's almost like if there is pressure and someone is pressuring you to do something, that should question you whether you're really in a professional setting and environment, and something's probably wrong. And I think all along the lines, right, there was pressure being placed on Paul, and he continued to raise these red flags. And so one other red flag that I would like us to talk about is the tax preparer that Paul was working with, where all these red flags came from, did not sign the tax return. Another problem that we hear pretty often. And Paul says that the tax preparer used TurboTax and forwarded it to him to sign and file on his own. So the tax preparer pushed it all on Paul and said, you go ahead and do this. And Paul says he did question, like, why didn't you sign it? And why do I have to file it? And the preparer just pushed back on Paul and said, well, it's just a requirement that you have to sign it. It's not mine. And it's because it was done on TurboTax. So any insights any of you guys can provide with that?
Yeah. So if they're not using professional software, then again, that's a red flag. And in this case, he's already paid. So he feels obligated to try to see this through, because he may not get a refund. But anyone who is preparing the tax return or assisting in preparing the tax return is responsible for signing the tax return. And if they don't sign the tax return, then they're considered a ghost preparer. And ghost preparers, that's another thing that is very important for you to understand. If there is anything wrong in that tax return and the individual who prepared the tax return didn't sign it, if there's an audit or if there was a refund bigger than you should have received, then the IRS and FTB, they're going back to you, which means that any money owed back to the IRS or FTB is going to come from you and not the tax professional. And you can tell the IRS and FTB, but I didn't prepare the return. This other individual prepared and I paid the tax, I paid the fee. And they're going to say, but you signed it. And so now you are responsible for it. And then you may have to then go after that preparer civilly if you can now find them, because a lot of times they prepare and then they take off and you're unable to find them. They're no longer taking your phone calls. So everyone who is preparing your tax return must sign the tax return.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to share with the audience, right? There is do-it-yourself, DIY, right, software available, where you're self-preparing your own taxes, and that can be done online through different avenues, where no professional is going to sign it because a professional didn't prepare it for you. But to your point, if you're working with a professional to do your tax return, they legally have to sign it. And so another red flag, because you've shared some examples or we've talked about examples in the past where people who are committing fraud are utilizing do-it-yourself software, right? Because then they can go in and create an account, and then because they're not paying for professional services, right? It essentially allows them to do a tax return on someone else's behalf, but illegally. And so another red flag for everyone, if anyone's ever trying to send you a tax return through a do-it-yourself kind of type of version, something to really pay attention to. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'd like to share a story that I came across this season during one of my visits in travels. We pursued a case that was filed to us through the CTEC website, ctec.org. A complaint was filed, and we reviewed the case and determined that we had jurisdiction because the individual didn't have a credential. And we went to this office to try to determine who the individual actually was. Is it the person that the individual named? And what is actually going on? Perhaps they did have a credential. We didn't have all the information. We got there, and it was a small office, and there were chairs lined up outside of the office with individuals sitting there. And I just happened to start talking to the individuals and asking them questions. How long have you come to this prepare? How long have you been sitting here today? And it was a pretty hot day. They were sitting outside, and went inside, met with the prepare, asked if I could have a few minutes. And I was able to talk with him and find out that he, in fact, was giving the same story. Oh, well, I'm using TurboTax and I'm just providing a service and assisting the community. Well, after explaining to him, well, if you want to, because here's the thing. If you are accepting money for this service that you're providing to the community, then it's really not a service, right? So whether you're using TurboTax, as this individual indicated, or you're using a professional software, you have to, regardless, it doesn't matter. You have to sign the tax return. You are the responsible party who is now taking all their information, putting it on the tax return. You cannot print it for them and then have them walk away with the printed return and tell them to sign it and return it. Because again, that individual is the responsible party, but if anything is wrong on that return, the taxpayer is going to end up being the responsible party. So we were able to find out a lot more about this professional preparer. And he has since registered with CTEC, completed the education and live scan, and he's registered with CTEC. But the important thing is to understand that there are groups, nonprofit groups through VITA or AARP who do provide a service, but even they have to sign the return, and they put what their group name is and their group number is. So it's similar to a P10, a preparer tax identification number, but it's just a little bit different. But these are groups that the IRS oversees. So regardless of where you're going, if you need help by a service, then there are individuals, and again, verify those individuals. But if you're going to do DIY, do it yourself, then you can go to the IRS or FTB websites. There are ways for you to create an account and file your own tax return. So it is possible for you to prepare a tax return multiple ways. It's just up to you to do the work and determine what is the best way for you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And many times I know there's offers and different things that people should be, those red flags. We didn't talk about them all today, but we talked about it in the past, promise of huge refunds and promising of things that, may be too good to be true. Something to kind of to think about in regards to these scenarios is because typically, right, people that are trying to commit fraud are trying to hook you one way or the other. And there's always avenues for you to check and verify whether these individuals are registered. And you don't even have to say anything, right? You can get their information, their name, where they're located, and then do the search without having to tell them, because if you don't want to be, create conflict. But it's really important that you do check. So thank you guys for sharing that.
To add to that, every preparer should have their credential up on the wall or on their desk. Legally, they have to provide that information to you. But again, just because there's a fancy certificate on the wall doesn't mean that it's an active license or registration. So take that information and then go verify. But everyone should have it either on their desk or on their wall, visible to all their clients.
The only comment that I was going to add, great comments, Rebecca, and thank you, Ray, was that Paul seemed to be somewhat studious in approaching this return. And one thing I'll say about the DIY software, we know that they have line-by-line instructions. They have AI-assisted services to provide. And I'm willing to bet you could go to the paid preparer section and TurboTax would have explained exactly what that means. And it would have been exactly the definition of that person that did the return, so that he could go back and because remember, he's got all kinds of red flags going on. And now he says, according to the software you use, you're supposed to be signing this return.
Yeah, great.
There you go.
Exactly. Well, hats off to Paul for really contacting us, asking these questions. A lot of stuff didn't seem right. And, there's another example of the things that we see and why we're doing this podcast, to educate the public so it doesn't happen to them. So, all right, Rebecca, could you also share with everyone on today, if they get some of these red flags and something doesn't seem like good or correct, or something seems off, how would they go about filing a complaint and getting in touch with you?
So there's multiple ways to file complaints. Definitely, if you have a complaint of a tax preparer, you can go to the CTEC website, ctec.org, and file a complaint. They come directly to us at the Franchise Tax Board. And because of security and disclosure laws, we're unable to share any information that you have provided to us to the person you're filing the complaint against, as well as we won't be able to go back to you and give you any information on what happens to this tax preparer that you've complained about, if anything at all. But our jurisdiction is whether or not a preparer has credentials. So if they don't have a credential, we'll pursue that case. Now, if the individual does have a credential and they've committed some type of fraud, there's also ways for you to file complaints as well. you can go to ftb.ca.gov and search report fraud on the website, and you can file a complaint there. You want to look for FTB form as well 987. That gives you information about the different types of fraud that can occur. There's also a phone number on the website as well for you to call. Another phone number you can call for FTB's general line is 800-852-5711. You want to let them know that this individual, the type of fraud that you believe they committed on your tax returns, or what exactly is going on with your case. If you would like to report this information to the IRS, you can go to the website, irs.gov, and look for forms 14157 and 14157A. Instructions on how to file the reports are there. And for licensing, California Board of Accountancy would like to hear from you in regards to CPAs that are doing things they shouldn't do with their licenses. The California State Bar for attorneys and the IRS EA office. You can go to their websites or call them directly to file complaints about these individuals.
Thank you so much, Tom and Rebecca, for chatting with us today. We would also like to mention that we did direct Paul on how to file a complaint with FTB and IRS. As mentioned, he has hired a new firm who is helping him amend and fix his tax returns. They are also helping him report this prepared to the IRS. Paul says he's learned his lessons from his mistakes, and we are all really happy to hear he's on his way to getting those things corrected and wish him well. As always, you can find more tips on the CTEC website. Just visit ctec.org. You can download them at taxpayerbeware.org. We have episodes in English and in Spanish. Thank you, everyone. I'm Ray Davis, and this has been Taxpayer Beware. We'll see you on the next episode.
This podcast was produced in partnership with Amaze Media Labs.